Hi, my name is Ken. Welcome to Pixzilla. We're on part 4 of our discussion on the basics in photography, and today we're talking about how to properly expose your images as a photographer. How does one know if the picture is properly exposed? There's 3 methods that you can use. The first method is trial and error. This takes the most time to learn, but it involves you taking the picture, looking at it on the back of the camera LCD screen, and making a decision if it's too bright or too dark. Sounds easy enough. This method is the base method and every photographer will use it to some degree, no matter how advanced they are. Now there are some tools to help guide you so you can make a more informed decision. So that brings us to method 2, using the histogram and blinking highlights. All digital cameras these days have a histogram feature that can be turned on either at the time of shooting or when you're reviewing your images. The histogram is a graph that tells you how the pixel data in the picture appears. The left side of the histogram represents dark pixels that look black, and the right side of the histogram represents white pixels that appear white. It really helps when you're learning photography to start thinking of images as a set of pixels, which are really just tiny dots of information that are made up of red, green, and blue color data. Now, when the pixel is pure black, all the red, green, and blue values are at 0. And when the pixel is pure white, the red, green, and blue values are maxed out at 255. It's the combination of varying levels of the red, green, and blue that give the pixel its color and its shade. Your goal as a photographer is to expose the image so that the histogram is well distributed from left to right, meaning that the image you took has pixel data that's well distributed across the spectrum from black to white pixels and all the shades of red, green, and blue in between. So here's a pro tip. Always try to expose your image so that there's no clipping of white or blacks. When you clip your whites and blacks, it results in an image or an area of the image that has no shade information. In post-production, trying to change the exposure of an area that's pure white with no color or shade data is really difficult. In fact, it's not possible to recover. So it's always better as a photographer to try to underexpose your images by about 1/3 to 1 stop of light so that you can maintain the details in the highlights of your image, which basically means you're trying not to blow out your highlights. Now, most cameras will have a way to show if a highlight is blown out by displaying an area that blinks when reviewing the image. Now, you'll need to go through your camera's manual to be able to go through the settings and turn that on. Try to avoid having an area of the image that's blinking, because that means that that area of the image has no color data whatsoever and it's overexposed. Now, there's 2 things that I need to say that are really important that you should know moving forward as a photographer. The first is that whenever you ask the camera to expose or to assist in exposing an image, either through using an automatic setting or using ETTL and Flash, more on that later in another video, the camera will try to expose as many pixels as gray. That middle of the spectrum gray is the goal for the camera because right in the middle between the blacks and the whites is the best place for maintaining data. And the second thing that you should know as a photographer is that as photographers and artists, we have to be aware of the scene that we're actually shooting and make decisions on whether to break the rules of photography that we just talked about. For instance, let's say you're shooting in front of a silhouette, right? Or say you're shooting a silhouette scene, for instance. You may want to blow out the sky or the background. And that's an artistic decision that you might need to make and break rules in order to do so. Or say, for instance, if you're shooting in a studio against a white backdrop, then perhaps it may be desirable to actually blow out the highlights enough to make the white backdrop pure white. Now, you'll be able to make those decisions in your art as you grow as a photographer. So that's the second way that we expose our images, using the histogram and trying to distribute the histogram evenly when taking a photo, and use the blinking highlights mode on your camera to keep you informed if any highlights are blown, which you can then avoid. And the third way that photographers can expose their images properly in their camera is by using the in-camera metering modes. Now, the camera will try to expose for neutral gray, as we just said, if at all possible. So if you point the camera at a dark suit, for instance, or something that's pure black, the camera in its automatic setting for exposures will try to turn that area gray. And likewise, if you're shooting in an area that's very bright, like say for instance against a white wedding dress, in an automatic setting, the camera will try to change that area to be gray, or set your exposure settings so that that area is gray. And that may or may not be desirable for you as an artist. So there are 3 main modes for metering in the camera. And I encourage you to read more about this if you need to. But the first way is called evaluative metering. And that's where the average pixel values across the entire image are averaged together. The second way is called center weighted average, where the average of the center of the image is prioritized for exposure metering. And the third way is called spot metering, where the exposure is measured only at the focal point that's chosen by you. I personally, as a photographer, use evaluative metering for most of my shots, and sometimes I'll switch to spot metering if I need to meter on a specific area in a challenging lighting situation, such as in a silhouette situation. In your camera, you'll see an exposure meter. It usually goes from -3 to +3 as a meter. And there's an indicator that tells you where your exposure is based on the exposure metering mode that you've chosen. If the indicator sits around +2, +3, it means that your image is too bright. And if it sits around -3, it means it's too dark. So try to keep your exposures so that the indicator lands around 0. Now, no matter whether you use the camera exposure meter or the histogram, trial and error is always useful. And you need to just get out there and practice your photography until properly exposing your images in any settings is second nature to you. So one last pro tip before we wrap this up. When you're shooting, it pays to take a moment before you start firing off shots to properly expose your image. It'll save you tons of time in post-production and make you a better photographer. So try to shoot so that you can show off your work to your clients right then and there, because you know your skill and trade as a photographer so well that you can properly expose an image in just about any situation. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this lesson on exposing your images. Stay tuned in the next episode when we'll be talking about the different modes on the camera, such as AV, TV, P mode, and manual, and which mode you should be using. If you enjoyed this video, please do leave it a thumbs up. That really helps us as we build our channel. And do leave us any questions in the comments down below. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.